Chapter 9. Let's talk about ethics. Ethics is kind of a fun chapter. We'll talk about some different philosophies, some approaches, and some guiding principles. Okay, first off, let's have an overview. We're going to talk about business ethics, but what is the difference between business ethics and general ethics? I can tell you very simply, there aren't any. The only difference is that business ethics are those ethics applied in business. There are levels of ethics. The first is legal. Legal means pertaining to the law. Just because something is legal doesn't mean it's ethical. And just because it's ethical doesn't necessarily mean it's legal. Ethics and morals both have to do with what is right and what is wrong. Ethics are based in an external reference, your religion, your society, your family, whereas morals are your own personal guiding beliefs. So let's talk about an example here. A legal man may cheat on his wife because it's not illegal. Okay, so somebody who follows the legal level of ethics. An ethical man may think about cheating on his wife, but will not because it's not ethical. In other words, society says you shouldn't cheat on your wife. A moral man will not even think of cheating on his wife because he personally believes that it's wrong. Let's talk about the different philosophies. The first of these is ethical universalism. And basically, ethical universalism is a matter of what's right is right, what's wrong is wrong. They are right or wrong regardless of sex, situation, nationality, so on. They are universally accepted, which is why they're called universalism. Universalism is based on the idea of a higher power, whatever you call that higher power. Basically, there's no gray. Everything is always black and white, and that's one of the pros. Some of the pros of this are that it's very easy to understand. You know what's right, you know what's wrong, and it's not hard to make a decision. People can always tell what to do in any situation. And it's very easy for the government to write laws when you're under universalism, because you don't have to say, well, is this right, is this wrong? The cons of the problem is that not every situation is black and white. So situations aren't always black and white. And the big con with this is whose interpretation of the higher power's word determines what's right and wrong. In other words, who determines what is right and what is wrong? The next one is ethical relativism. This is the position that nothing is objectively or factually right or wrong, but it depends on the particular society or culture. Understands that we call this one the when in Rome, do as the Romans. You've probably heard that saying. Ethicism is not based on power, but the norms of a culture, also called normative relativism. The pros are that it does take cultural differences into account, and the values aren't at the hand of a higher power, they come from social contract. On the other hand, the cons are what determines a culture. Is it a family unit? Is it a city? Is it a nation? Okay. And sometimes there are conflicts about what is right and what is wrong. The last of the big philosophies that we'll talk about, because you obviously could take an entire philosophy course on this, and you could take a whole philosophy degree in this and never come to agreements. The last of these is integrative social contracts. And this is some place between ethical universalism and ethical relativism. And basically what it says is that some things are universal and others can follow the cultural norms, which is correct. Pretty easy to understand. Situations are not always black and white, but because of the cultural norms, people know what to do in a situation, or should know what to do in a situation. It takes cultural differences into account. And it's not based strictly on higher power, but in a social context. And the bad things is again, is who determines what part is universal and what part is social, what part is cultural, what part is acceptable. It's very hard to determine what is a culture, and there are conflicts about what's right and what's wrong. Okay, let's look at some approaches to dealing with ethics. The first is utilitarian. Utilitarian is the approach that brings the most net benefit. And sometimes, if you look up this definition, it'll say what brings the best happiness. But happiness in this case is not happiness as we would determine it in normal cases, like, oh, I don't have a test this week, so I'm happy. It's actually the best net benefit. The two questions you ask on this is, what effect will my act have? And what effect would everyone doing this have? So it's boiled down to the greatest good for the greatest number. The next one is the rights approach. The rights approach is based on protecting the basic moral rights of others. All people have dignity and basic human rights, such as the right to make decisions, the right to truth, the right not to be injured, and the right to those rights upon which agreement is agreed. For us, we have certain rights in our country, but there are other basic human rights. Some rights are absolute, called natural or universal rights, but others are considered granted until somebody makes a claim that that isn't a right. The more a decision infringes on the rights, the less ethical it is. The justice approach. Basically, this reflects the idea that people should be treated equitably and fairly. Okay, the common good approach, that an individual's good is tied to the good of the community. The big issue with common good is who determines what's good. The virtue approach relies on the decision maker in this case. A person believes that there are certain characteristics, morals that they personally should follow. And the virtue approach is the one in which a person acts the way that they want to be seen. Some guiding principles: we have the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have others do unto you. It's found in almost every culture and every religion in some form. And the other is the billboard or mother rule, which is kind of fun. And the question is, how would I feel if the decision that I just made was put on a billboard? Or worse, what would your mother think if she knew what you had done? And they're just kind of quick checks. Is it a dilemma or a decision? Okay, a dilemma has no right answer. Generally, it's the lesser of two evils. A decision, on the other hand, is a choice without any issues, and there's an obvious right or wrong. Should I use a foreign supplier or not? Well, yeah, I'm going to save money. No, I'm not. And there's a right or a wrong answer eventually. You can come up with one based on dollars. However, should I use a foreign supplier who uses child labor is a dilemma. Should I or shouldn't I? What are the pros? What are the cons in doing that? So ethical decision making has several steps. The first one is, does the decision involve two goods or two bads? Because if it involves two goods or two bads, then it's a dilemma. The second step is to determine the facts. Find the facts, understand that all the facts may not be available. You may not know everything you need to know. Who are the stakeholders? Who has an important take in the outcome? And then clarify what options can you take. Evaluate your options. Look at the utilitarian, justice, common good, virtue, rights, the social contracts, utilitarianism, universalism. Look at those and look at the different options. Think about which approach is best suited to you and your business. Okay, decide which option will best suit the situation finally. And then, as a quick check, think about the billboard rule. How would I feel if this is plastered on the front page of a newspaper, or if I see this decision, Fred decides to use child labor on a billboard, and then implement it and pay attention to those people who are interested. Think about what the impact was and what you learned from doing it. Maybe you didn't make the right decision. How would you change it next time? So, why do people act unethically? Well, the number one is personal gain, wealth, and selfish interests. It's greed or ego. And we see that in business, unfortunately. Sometimes what we see is heavy pressure on company managers to meet or beat their earnings targets. This is what happened with Enron. We do a very strange thing in this country, and that is we want companies to tell us how much they're going to earn every quarter. And it's very short term, and so sometimes managers feel this huge pressure to keep earnings up, so they'll cheat on the books or whatever so that their stock prices stay high. The other thing is that there's a company culture that puts profitability and business performance ahead of ethical behavior. It could be that the CEO is just not a real ethical person. So, how do we manage ethics? Well, there's the unconcerned manager. He just doesn't pay any attention whatsoever. He just does what he wants to do. There's the damage control. We saw this with BP. We see it all the time. We saw it with the Exxon Valdez a while back. Basically, we're not going to pay too much attention to it until something happens, and then we'll go in and try to fix it and do damage control. Then there's the compliance guys. These are the guys who do the absolute minimum as required by law and nothing more. And finally, you have the ethical or moral group. These are the guys who are very proactive as far as dealing with ethical issues. So why should we be ethical? I mean, obviously it's more profitable not to be. Well, they're just, when you do things that are bad, they can reflect badly on the character of the company and the personnel involved. It's good business. It's in the self-interest of the shareholders, even though in the short term, maybe it's a non-concerned attitude gives you more money. But if you have to come in and clean up an oil spill, that's going to cost you a lot more than it probably would have cost you to just fix it in the first place. In the long run, it's in the self-interest of the shareholders. If you have a problem with your company reputation, you can cause lasting damage. It can cause problems with your customers, with your suppliers, but it can also cause problems with your employees, lack of productivity, inability to find good help. And rehabilitating your reputation is very expensive and it's very time consuming. As I said, customers might decide that they're not going to come back to the business, and no matter how much rehabilitation you do, they could just be lost forever. When a company has a bad reputation, ethical and top-notch employees don't really want to come and work for you. And it's ultimately very expensive to be unethical, even though people think, well, it'd be cheaper if we just go ahead and do this. So there's these three levels of costs that people don't really think about. The level one costs are those that are most obvious. Okay, these are things like governmental fines and penalties, lower stock prices, and civil penalties. These are obvious, but they're actually, in the long run, the lesser of the expenses. The second group are the level 2 costs. These are a little bit hidden, but not necessarily where you can't see them. These deal with things like, okay, we're going to have a lawsuit, so we have to pay for lawyers, we have to investigate everything, we have to subpoena people, we have to give training to employees about ethics. So now people aren't working, they're being retrained. We have to pay for whatever corrective actions happened. And if we don't comply and our profession doesn't require, the government might step in. So there's always a chance that there's going to be future compliance costs. But the level 3 costs are the ones that are not obvious. They're not on the books. They're hard to see. But on the other hand, they're very, very expensive. Customer defection can break a company. Loss of reputation. People don't want to loan you money. People don't want to work for you. People don't won't buy your products. People won't give you supplies. Lost employee morale. People are sad about having to come to work and they don't want to be productive and they spend a lot of time blabbing about what happened. I mean, employee cynicism. They say they're going to do blah, 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 and they don't. Okay, high employee turnover because people don't want to work for an unethical company. Higher recruiting costs because you can't just word of mouth or go put an ad in the paper now because people know who you are. They know you have a bad reputation. And if you'll cheat at one thing, you'll cheat on another thing. Adverse effects on productivity because of people leaving, because of morale, because of cynicism. People are just not going to work that hard. And then the compliance with harsher government regulations because of the problems that the behavior caused. Level 1 costs receive a lot more executive attention because they're more visible and generally they're less damaging. Whereas the level 3 costs are generally hidden, they receive almost no attention and are very damaging to the company. And that's pretty much the end of chapter 9.